Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this third in our series of events. As you're probably aware, this is the final event in our series on powering MDM. If you weren't able to attend any of the first sessions, don't worry. We did record them all and the recordings are available. If you're interested during this presentation, just drop your email in the chat directed to Phil Miller and he'll make sure that you get a link to the previous events. Today's session is going to be a little bit more technical in nature than the previous two. Hopefully that will help provide a good understanding of our approach to helping with MDM projects. We're going to start with a presentation from Gary Katz. Gary's a seasoned expert in the MDM space, having implemented solutions with MarkLogic and other vendors. Next, we'll then have a session from Frank from MarkLogic, who's going to talk about some of the architectural patterns and approaches that we see in customers implementing MarkLogic. Then we're going to hear from Thomas at MuleSoft, who's presented at our first event their API-driven approach, and they're going to be on hand to answer any questions that you have. And then finally, we've got Frederic, who's going to discuss our approach for working with customers to help understand your requirements and provide a proof of value engagement, which does exactly what it sounds like it does. So what I wanted to do before we get to the presentations is just a quick recap a couple of those previous sessions for those that didn't attend. If you've only got time to catch up with one session across all of your days, then the one I would suggest is the presentation from Epcon and Vaudoise. They discussed their VIP platform and how they're building that as the cornerstone of their digital transformation project. Jean-Francois covered the vendor selection process, their need for data governance, their requirement not to get lost in ETL process, and to remain agile above all to the changes that they were going to face. They also had a roadmap that involves implementing an operational data hub to eventually get to their goal of becoming a data-driven organization. So it's a really interesting presentation, well worth taking 20 minutes or so to view. I know today we also have a mix of existing MarkLogic customers who are looking for new use cases for their investment, and we also have people that are new to the platform. So for any newbies out there, they also had a quick recap on day one of the sort of underlying technologies in MarkLogic that make it a powerful platform to help with MDM. So do take the time to have a look at that if that's interesting, and we'll go into a bit more detail today anyway. On our second day, we had a fantastic session from Frank, who's going to be talking later, who demoed some of our smart mastering features, which I know, again, you'll hear more about today. Frank showed how we integrate, harmonize, and track the provenance of data, and even how you can unmerge records as it becomes clear records should have been remain unmerged through the process. And then finally, draw your attention to the session given by Soprasteria about the lessons learned from implementing MarkLogic projects with customers. I think it was a really interesting session with lots of good advice, but I think the clearest piece for me was that stay super clear on your business objectives. Make sure you start small and iterate. The agility of MarkLogic really encourages you to stay fluid and iterate and build as you go. So that's a quick recap from me. What I want to do is hand over to Gary. Gary's a solutions director and senior account executive for MarkLogic in our state and local government practice. He's perfectly skilled to talk about MDM, having previously been the CTO for the federal practice of a data integration vendor, where he specialized in applying MDM to national security missions. And Gary's going to be presenting the use of MarkLogic to create a multi-person index, as seen in Medicaid applications, as well as MarkLogic's multi-model approach. So over to you, Gary.
Okay. So my name is Gary Katz. I'm a solutions director and senior account executive with MarkLogic state and local practice. This is my second time at MarkLogic. I was actually here once before. And in between my stays at MarkLogic, I was the CTO for the national security division of a large data integration vendor, where I got to understand how the traditional MDM technologies work. My background's actually in computational linguistics going really far back. So master data management is a pretty good fit in that regard, as well as MarkLogic for that matter, because it involves search and involves modeling and involves identity resolution. So it's a very good nexus. But what really attracted me back to MarkLogic to really pay attention to how MarkLogic can solve this problem is the consolidation that MarkLogic provides in one platform to be able to do identity resolution and master data management in a very novel way, in a way that actually simplifies the process and frankly was a bit of a headache when I was not at MarkLogic. So, and in my current capacity with MarkLogic, I support our state and local business. We're going to be seeing a demonstration today of mastering capabilities as it applies to the Medicaid space and what we call our MarkLogic Data Hub for Medicaid, where we take in person data and claims data and provider data, and we find a golden version of truth for that. But before I go into that, the Medicaid specific piece, because we're really not going to go too far into Medicaid so much as mastering, it's helpful to understand why traditional MDM approaches are difficult. And really what it comes down to is the complexity of performing the systems integration required in order to stand up and get an initial operating capability in your MDM solution. If you want an MDM solution using traditional technologies, you're going to need, starting from the bottom up, data connectors to your individual data sources. You're going to need some kind of an ETL tool in order to move that data out. You're going to need a separate data quality capability, a separate lineage and provenance capability. You're going to need the identity resolution capability. You're going to need the underlying database where you're going to store those records, which is going to be yet another product. And then you're going to have security and alerting and governance and all these other tools bolted on top. And these are all separate products. They may be from one, corporate family, but they tend to be separate code bases, not something that's very, homogeneously put together. So you sort of put together this Franken architecture that you need to balance, which creates problems. It's going to create configuration management challenges. It's going to create skill set challenges. It's going to create time to mission challenges, because by the time you've stood this up and gotten to initial operating capability, you're 12 to 18 months out from when you first started the project. And in MarkLogic, we simplify that process drastically. And that really was the amazing part. So MarkLogic is the back end of healthcare.govs and the Data Services Hub. And we are actually the master person index for healthcare.gov. When we first implemented the master person index, we didn't have any formalized mastering process. All we had were MarkLogic's native capabilities in order to implement identity resolution. It took 2 FTEs, 2 months to stand up the master person index inside of MarkLogic. And that is before there was any formalized process for it. Now we've since formalized that into the data hub. You can perform mastering in hours. You can perform mastering in days and weeks before you get the entire thing stood up, versus months or years before you have that implemented, with all of the governance and security and data discovery capabilities all built directly into the core. So why does traditional MDM usually fail? Because you have to know everything you got to do up front in order for it to succeed. You have to imply all of your own lineage and provenance capabilities to track how data got to where and when it changed and who made that change. You have to go and implement all of the discovery tools for finding the MDM pieces all on your own, which means that if the world were perfect and nothing changed and new data sources didn't come in and existing data sources didn't change over time, yes, you could do it. And you'd invest the time, you'd get it done, and it would last forever. But we all know that that's not practical, and that data changes and requirements change much faster than that, and you need to be able to adapt. So this is why a lot of those projects tend to fail. What MarkLogic provides is a data hub that provides all of that systems integration work that you traditionally need to do on your own in order to implement an MDM solution. It provides it upfront in one tightly coupled platform, one code base where MarkLogic's core capabilities are the foundation. And you can immediately throw your data into MarkLogic and start moving it through a process and have a business steward actually implement the integration capabilities. You don't need an expert PhD in linguistics identity resolution in order to get mastering performed inside of MarkLogic. You just need someone who can work through the screens and the workflows to say, yeah, I'd like to go and do two names that sound alike, and I want to do it based off of, how much I trust one source versus the other. It is very easy to implement and execute mastering in MarkLogic out of the box versus what you would need to do in order to stand up that system in the first place, much less have people with the skill sets in order to execute those missions. So with that, let's just jump into some mastering capabilities. So I'm going to fly through a couple pieces here. The question is, who is Bob Smith or who is Rob Jones? And, traditionally the answer to that is, well, the only person who really knows that is Bob Jones's mother, right? That's going to be the person who definitively knows. Absent that kind of knowledge, we have to figure it out in some other meaningful way. So you have two kinds of mastering strategies. You've got truth-based and you've got trust-based. Truth-based is, how much do I trust the individual sources of the data that are coming in and the veracity of that data as it applies to the mission that I'm trying to work and the problem I'm trying to solve? Trust-based is more of the application, truth, I just switched those, but strike that, reverse it. Trust-based is how much I trust them. Truth-based is how I choose to implement an algorithm to say, I'm going to match these two names together. We're going to see that there are going to be some tricky examples of that because language is infinite with infinite possibilities, and there's infinite possibilities for possibilities. So you have to apply the 80% rule to say, I'm going to capture most of the like identities, but then when I find identities that are a close match or a maybe match, I can't let them fall through. I have to flag those for review. So usually in an audience environment where I'm speaking directly to a customer or a prospect, I would play a game at this point. But since I don't know anyone who's on the call, except for the folks who I work with at MarkLogic, who have undoubtedly seen this already and know the answers, I'm going to kind of walk through this quiz. So we've got two people. We've got a Jeffrey Katz. We've got a Gary L. Katz. We've got their names, place of birth, year of birth, doctors and dentists, i.e. providers, the college or university they attended, the major, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year addresses, year of graduation, first employer out of college, and first two subsequent addresses. So as I look at these two people, I see Jeffrey and Gary. Okay, those are different names, and I see that they've got a lot of the same address information in here. Are these two people the same? At first glance, my answer to this would be maybe. They're possibly twins, right? That happens. It seems like they have, different majors, but they've lived together. But then they're in college, and their subsequent addresses change over time. So a temporal aspect of this is actually quite important. And Jeffrey and Gary aren't exactly the same, but if I run those through a SoundX or a double metaphone algorithm, it actually compute to be somewhat similar because there's a hard starting J and a hard G. They end, they have an R and a Y in them, and their last names are the same. So this is a maybe. I might merge these two folks together. What about these two people, Gary J. Katz and Gary L. Katz? So now I look at these folks, their years of birth is off by, a few years. Their graduation years are also off by a few years. They have different majors. They have different living and address residences throughout college. So yeah, they've got the same name and they seem to be from the same hometown area. I should probably qualify that Bucks County is a suburb of Philadelphia. But I'd say that these are probably, if you're guessing, these are probably two different people who are off by a few generations. That's probably a good guess, right? So I would not merge these two people together. Last quiz that I usually give is this one, and then we'll stop the guessing games here. Gary J. Katz and Gary L. Katz, both born in '81, from the Philadelphia area. Generally, they have the same providers, they have the same major, they seem to live together. Their freshman year address is one floor apart. There's a 610 and a 510, but otherwise everything seems pretty consistent. Your graduation's the same. They both worked at Lockheed Martin. They seem to live together. Yeah, this is, in all likelihood, this is probably the same person. They've got a different middle initial. That could be a typo. So I'd merge them together. or rather I should say most people might merge them together. And if you guessed that, I would tell you humbly that you'd be wrong. Because in reality, my best friend and I have the exact same first and last names. We are tremendous narcissists. We are friends with each other. We both grew up in the Philadelphia area. We both had the same hometown. We both had the same doctors and dentists growing up, not knowing each other and not knowing that the other attended those same providers. We both randomly went to Penn State together. We were randomly assigned to the same dorm building, one floor apart. Probably not random, probably someone in housing with a sick sense of humor, but that's fine. We were both computer science majors. We roomed together sophomore through senior years. We were on the same senior design project, translating natural language queries into, SQL 92 statements for third normal form databases. We both graduated, went to Lockheed Martin together. When I left Lockheed Martin, he was the backfill in my group. We lived together for a couple years outside of college, and then our paths deviated. So on paper, we look tremendously alike. So what do we learn? Other than the fact that I'm apparently entirely replaceable. Linguistic identity resolution isn't in itself sufficient. It's only one lens by which you can look at a problem, right? And it's not necessarily bad. It's linguistic identity resolution. It's the most you can do. Anyone who looked at that third example, including me in most cases, would have merged those records together. And admittedly, we're a corner case, but there are a lot more corner cases than you'd think that there are. And those are usually the ones that cause you problems in MDM environments. It's not the easy John Smith scenarios. It's where you've got two people, John Smith and Jonathan Smith, who look very similar. And it's not just linguistic. It's incorporating other information that makes it tricky. Well, think about George Foreman and all of his kids, George Sr., George Jr., George III, George IV. They all lived together at one point, probably would make it difficult unless you had birth year and things like that you could try to assess. So as a side note, I do like to show this is me and my family, and this here we are. And in the event of my untimely demise, we do have backup photos taken with my doppelganger. I show this as a bit of dark humor. I also show it to show that this is not, in fact, a contrived example. This person is real, and he is one of my very best friends. So how could we have figured this out better? Well, one way to do that would be by leveraging relationships. If you were to look at Gary J. and I over the course of time and location with a semantic lens to this, you get a much better picture of where we converge and where we diverge. Earlier on, we were much closer together, both in terms of proximity and in terms of, where we lived and our courses, and our friend network was all very much the same. But as we moved beyond, I moved to DC, he moved to Baltimore, we went to different employers, and our family relationships are inherently different as well. And if you could look at things through a family relationship lens, and in Medicaid, that's actually a very important application at times for program integrity or for establishing who has what benefits and who's claiming what child. If you've got multiple parents who are in the system in broken families that are structured differently, you may want to know that kind of information so that you can assess who is the right person for which the benefit belongs. This is something that's unique to MarkLogic. You could run a custom job that could look at a graph-based network and use that as a discerning factor as part of your mastering strategy. That is something that you could do inside of MarkLogic. You could also look at this data through the lens of geospatial and temporal lenses in order to assess, hey, how does this change over time? Yet something else that's also important. So that kind of brings us to the end of, the preface session here. I'm going to jump directly into an example of how we do this. This is what we call matching and linking via smart mastering inside of MarkLogic. So with that, MarkLogic, sorry. So let me pull up my demonstration environment. So I'm going to log in as Dr. Smith to our demo environment here. And Dr. Smith is a highly privileged user. He can see everything. We also have another user in here called Mr. No PII, where Mr. No PII can't see PII. We're going to log in, and we're brought directly into our Data Hub Community Edition environment here. And we've mapped out a Medicaid-based scenario here where we've got members. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. We have members, we have claims that leverage a standard called FHIR. That's not really relevant for this conversation other than to know that we've been able to help model what claims look like into MarkLogic. Claims have individual claim items, so you can have one claim that goes in that has 5 different doctors visits on top of it, and each claim item is related to a particular provider. And oftentimes these systems have case management type things that are associated with them, so we built in relationships to case management and case workers and different exhibits that are associated with each case into this model. And of course, notably, members have relationships to themselves by vis-a-vis dependents, and they have parents and their children. So I've taken the liberty of loading some data in, just completely as is, if you will, into this model. And I've done this via the integration tab. And this is simply a series of steps by which we can load and manipulate data into the model that we've prescribed on the prior screen. So I've loaded in claims, I've loaded in something called Curum, which is a representation of members in XML format. I've loaded in some what's called MMIS capabilities that are here that are further member information. The only thing I really haven't run here is the mastering. So if we look at the data in a pre-mastering capacity, I'm going to search for someone named Drindy. Drindy, D-R-E-Y. Now, as I look at Drindy, I'm going to see that I have multiple different versions of it. I've got Drindy spelled with a Y on the end. I have a Drindy spelled with an I on the end. The address information so far is all the same. I've got a day over here where I have the first name and the last name transposed. And I also see that Drindy has relationships to someone named Nuno. So if I look at Nuno, I see Nuno Day with a particular social security number. And then I also see another Nuno down here as I click. That is Nuno Day Jr. with a very different social security number. So top level, what we're really looking at here is we see that Drindy has, there appears to be one Drindy who has a relationship with her husband and spouse, and they have a child, Nuno Jr. But right now I have these represented as 3 different entities for Drindy, and I have 2 rightful entities for Nuno. I'm going to look at one other person here, Mohammed. We're going to take a look at Mohammed's graph here. And Mohammed, when I search for Mohammed, and notably, by the way, keep in mind, I'm searching for Mohammed, but I'm getting all the different various versions of the name for both Mohammed and same for Drindy, right? So this is part of MarkLogic's underlying capability to leverage this kind of context and linguistic capability to expand out the search. And when I see here Mohammed, I click on MetMet. I see that I've got social security number of 1191 on the end. I see another Mohammed, also 1191, same address, same for this Mohammed and that Mohammed. But then I've got this Mohammed out here, and he's got a slightly different social security number. Now, it's 1190 on the end, as you can see right over here. Now, that's not a big difference. That's a reasonable typo. Now, if we were doing a greedy merge on these folks, we'd say that these are unrelated people, and we'd lose this Mohammed. But MarkLogic's mastering capabilities are quite capable enough to handle this kind of user error, if you will, or data entry error, to be able to help capture this. So now, let's go back and run the mastering flow. So I'm going to run the mastering step here, and I'm just going to run these. And while this is running, I'm going to jump into each of these steps. So we have a match step and a merge step. Now we're talking about person identities. So what we do when we're looking at person identities is we break down the attributes that are relevant to a person that we want to match upon. So we're looking at things like social and last name and address information, year of birth, month of birth, day of birth, and you can see associated weights with each one. This is what we would call the truth-based mastering, right? We're associating weights that are part of this algorithm, but we're assigning specific, to social security number. Usually it's right, but not always. And we're setting 2 thresholds down below to say, if it's over 60, which is an arbitrary number that in sampling this data we've decided is pretty good, but then we're going to merge them together. It's not over 60, but it is still over 43. We're going to flag that for human review. And then the next piece is the merge step. And in the merge step, we're doing a very simple merge here, which is we're going to take the longest name and we're going to merge that and make that the golden record. But the notable piece here is the source weight. We're saying that for social security number, we trust the MMIS data source that we loaded in more than we trust the Curum data source. This gets back to the trust-based mastering, which is if I have banking information, HR information, and sales information, I probably trust the financial numbers out of my banking repository more than I trust any financial numbers out of the other two. So I'm going to give it more of a weight. That's the same situation here. So we get to apply the best of both worlds between truth-based and trust-based mastering inside of MarkLogic. So with that, I think my mastering is probably completed by now. I'm going to go back to my Explore screen. Now I see Mohammed has merged and completely folded. I see all of the different Mohammeds that are listed here, that are merged into this master record and the data sources from which they came. If I click on the info tab, I see that I have all of the lineage of how and when this was merged. This is good. This is exactly what I wanted. And I have, even though they have different social security numbers, I still got that one dangling Mohammed who was out there merged into my golden record. Now, when I go to Drindi, let's see what happened with Drindi. Use MarkLogic's built-in search. I search on Drindi, I click on Drindi, and wonderful. I've got a fully merged Drindi record with, that I wanted, that's showing one Drindi. However, I also seem to have a fully merged Nuno. And that's not right. Because when we looked at Nuno, we said that Nuno was a father-son relationship there. There was a Nuno Day and a Nuno Day Jr. So this is an error. This should not have happened. I understand why it happened. The names were very similar. And the scores totaled beyond, because of all the likeness, beyond what the social security number in and of itself could have outweighed. So in MarkLogic, I'm just going to hit unmerge, right click, unmerge. Am I sure I want to unmerge it? Yes, I am. I unmerge them. Now I've got my two Nunos relating back to my one golden record here of Drindi. And these records are completely as they were before I merged them, with the full lineage of what I did when I merged and unmerged them. So I know every action that was taken on this record, the merge and the unmerge. Now, MarkLogic makes this look easy, and that's for a good reason. Because in MarkLogic, it is easy. It is not hard to do this because of the way that MarkLogic does mastering, because we have total visibility into all the records that are inside of MarkLogic. In traditional systems, if you've ever had to do an unmerge, you'd probably much rather have a root canal, because it is difficult. It is hard because they do reference-based mastering overwhelmingly. That is not what MarkLogic does. We have all of the raw authoritative data inside of the data hub. So for us, if I've got 5 records that are merged together, but one of them is wrong, I don't have to go and balance them out in their authoritative systems where they came from. I got them in MarkLogic where I can just simply unmerge them into the 5 records, take out the one that I don't like, and then remerge the other 4 back together. It's very simple. Last thing I'd like to show, because I know I'm hitting time here, is recall that there were human review flags. So you may not have noticed, but there's a little red icon that popped up here that I'm going to open up for our notifications. So when I go and I look at some of these records that are in here, I'm seeing records that were close, but not quite ready for merge. This was that between 43 and 60 threshold. So I've got the Peltahellers here, and what I'm looking at are all 3 of the records that are in question. There's the 3 columns here, plus a merge preview. And every red row, in essence, shows where there's a difference between one of the values for each of those rows. So I can see that I've got John, Jonathan, and John spelled differently. I've got perhaps a variation in Peltaheller because of capitalization in the last name, over here. So it's a question of, should I merge them or should I not merge them? And in looking at this record, barring them being like the Gary Katz situation, I'd say that this is probably a good match. So I'm going to say merged them together. Now they're merged. And if I go back to my search environment here in Explorer, I search on Pelta Heller, I'm going to find, there's Jonathan, and there are my Pelta Hellers all merged together with the full lineage information of the merging that took place. Now, last but not least, what I'll finally show here is this data is only as valuable as how you use it. So when we create these applications in MarkLogic, it's for downstream consumption, so you can make use of this better data. Now, a good example from a Medicaid standpoint, where we leverage master person indices quite a bit so that we can actually figure out who is the right person that we're looking for, is to compare the pre-mastered versus the post-mastered analytics that you can get. So I've got a local version of Power BI here that I've pulled onto my screen. And what I've done is for a particular subset, we just honed in on a particular zip code attribute. You're seeing the volume of people, right, in the pre-mastered flavor up here. Actually have a label there if I put that out, versus the post-mastered environment on the right side of the chart. So note that this chart is querying pre-mastered and post-mastered together, because we still have the pre-mastered data inside MarkLogic if you wanted those kinds of raw analytics as well, but more than likely, you want the cleaned up analytics that you see on the right. And lastly, we have another chart here that actually shows, the claims and the caseworkers by caseload. You could look at this from a lens of how many providers are charging my Medicaid system. If you're looking at program integrity or fraud, waste, and abuse, now you've got collapsed providers with numeric values for how much they're submitting to Medicaid in claims. You could figure out the claim amount by diagnosis. This is helpful for population health and perhaps figuring out the social determinants of health. Figure out which are my most prevalent diagnosis codes that I'm seeing within my Medicaid community, which is Medicaid is for those who are less fortunate, who are not doing as well. So this is a certain socioeconomic part of the population where this kind of information is helpful to figuring out what steps can you proactively take to help improve this within that population. And of course, you can see any other kinds of analytics as well. This is very simple. MarkLogic is reading this data out using our relational or SQL-based, rendering of the data, because MarkLogic is multi-model. We can handle things in unstructured formats, XML, JSON, what have you. We can handle things that are semantically relationship-based and use that as part of our data cleaning strategies. And we can also leverage this for rendering data out. So the traditional BI tools, Power BI, Tableau, Click, MicroStrategy, or any other, for that matter, can hit us directly from a relational standpoint and query us with SQL. So that brings me to the end of the demonstration.
Wonderful. Now we're going to hand over to Frank Rubino, who's going to give us a deep dive on some common architectural patterns and the benefits that they can bring to your MDM solution. So over to you, Frank.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit, use my experience in architecture and as a solutions director at MarkLogic to talk about some of the architecture that is behind these MDM systems. And, we just had this fantastic presentation by Gary talking about people and figuring out who's a person and figuring out answers to questions about people. In a mastering context, there's even more before you even start to master. What business processes are your people connected to? Where do they live? And what's their credit score? I think I saw my social security number on one of Gary's sample records, but. You have to manage also that sort of secure information. To get this business capability, we build systems, right? We build large or small enterprise systems for managing our data. And those systems follow principles, and the principles, and this is kind of how I like to think about architecture in general, is sort of driven by principles, which is a slightly different thing. I mean, ultimately the principles are informed by business and business initiatives shape and guide those principles. But when you break it back into the sort of architecture domain, you really are starting, I think, with these kinds of just principled ideas. How are you gonna, what does your application have to do? What does it not do? And you come up with a certain number of these kinds of principles for MDM, which I have characterized here as, and I'll just go through them. I know you can read them, but I want to talk a little bit about each one. So authority, MDM has to provide an authoritative version of the data. And that means everything from the truth-based to trust-based mastering that Gary showed us, where you have a score for your confidence about the particular veracity of a piece of data, to the provenance and lineage that we also saw in Gary's demo, where we saw how the data was derived from which files and which processes, and that authority is what the business depends on to be able to make decisions. The second principle I wanted to talk about is security. We're sharing this authoritative data in an environment where some people need to see some parts of it, other people need to see different parts of it, and if it's public facing, there's yet another sort of lens that you need to look at it through. And naturally, it's stuff you want to protect. So the MDM solution that you wind up creating needs to provide the security to protect your data and allow for safe sharing of it. And the last principle that I want to talk to you about here, as we kind of lay the groundwork for what's coming up, is this principle of economy. And economy is a fairly big principle. It includes everything from low-code, no-code environments where you're actually spending less work hours and less work effort to get a certain result, that's economic, to being able to scale your underlying system on commodity hardware and be able to spin up cloud instances and pay as you go. And the system, your MDM system, supports that capability, for instance. Economy also comes in with high availability and disaster recovery. So you have a system that is going to be resilient to loss. So economy is a kind of a broad concept, and operational conservatism is a way that I like to think about it, where you're spending the least amount of effort on and getting the most value out of it, and that can happen because you've got a system that an MDM system that is driven largely by automation, let's say, or has an integration profile that decreases workload of maintaining that integration, tuning that integration, keeping those integrations running. And so these are the principles that one would want, that I would say one would want to follow as one architects an MDM solution. So you have principles. Now, your principles have to map to capabilities. That's sort of the second part of doing architecture, right? You sort of say, okay, I want to do this. Now, what is going to enable me to do that? And the important capabilities that I think an MDM system has to have are a flexible data model. And a flexible data model is a rather important piece that lets you do things like Gary showed, putting data in and searching it before you even build any kind of data model around it. So that's and also handling multiple forms of data. So we call MarkLogic, for instance, a multi-model database because it can handle scalar data, tabular data, hierarchical data like JSON and XML, and also semantic triple data. And semantic data and graph data becomes really important because MDM is concerned with relationships between data and and characterizing and enabling the exploration of the data through those relationships. We talked a bit about advanced security already. MarkLogic, for instance, and by the way, many other systems out there have role-based access control security. MarkLogic goes a few steps further with providing common criteria, government-grade security, and has a few extras like compartment-based security and encryption at rest and things like that you need to in an MDM system to provide for that kind of secure sharing that you want to do with all your great data that you created in the system. Your MDM system needs a way of mastering, and I think I would go so far as to say it needs smart mastering. Smart mastering is actually something that's going to allow you to take advantage of the flexible data model and being able to, and the relationships that you're going to discover in the data. Your system needs to do some sort of harmonization, whether that's transformations of data on these kind of ETL pipelines that then, that are then transformed from operational data stores into your MDM system and then pushed into your MDM system in a further transformational workload. That's your system. Your MDM system just has to have the capability to do those kind of data manipulation operations. In the modern world, we need connectors. MDM systems don't sort of live on their own in a little bubble. They are integrated into larger environments that have a lot of different subsystems and also third-party systems that are pushing data into your MDM environment. Connectors are also useful to consume the data, like Gary showed you those BI dashboards with the histograms of zip codes and showing mastering and stuff like that. Those that's because we have a connector that allows us to consume data out of a MarkLogic MDM system. And then flexible deployment is an important capability that gives you that economy of that really speaks to that economy principle, where you're going to be able to run your MDM system in the cloud, whatever cloud you choose. Run it on premise. Run a hybrid model, some on premise, some in the cloud, and have the resiliency in all of those deployments to be able to handle failures. And to be able to elastically grow and shrink as the system needs demand. So those are the capabilities and the principles I really wanted to talk about. Given those, when you're architecting an MDM solution, you have some choices, and I characterize the choices as really coming down, at least for today, for this morning, to these kind of three questions. And the questions are: do you design an MDM that can synchronize with the source systems, or it's just a kind of a read-only reflection of the source system? Both those approaches are helpful to are used by our customers and are helpful in different use cases. Do you model new business entities, or are you going to leave? Are you going to basically leave your data, if it's tabular, intact in the kind of table structure that it has in the source system? And then are you going to, I think the third question, the third choice that I want to go into here is, are you building a registry style MDM system or a hub style? And I'll talk a little bit about the differences between those two systems. And so this is where I want to go with our talk this morning. So the first choice that I wanted to talk about is synchronization. So when you have a synchronized MDM, what that means to me is that you have this MDM system that is going to both read data from the systems of record, like here we're showing like a mortgage documents system of record that's being consumed by the MDM, mastered, and maybe enriched, and then the enriched content is going to be pushed out from the MDM and synchronized back into the system of record repository. So that means, and so why would you do something like that? Well, you do get to create authoritative records that way. You also, because everything that passes through the MDM, and even if it's reconsumed with an authority. It's got the lineage and provenance that the MDM system has provided. And the other benefit, people do this because they have a lot of client systems on the system of record, and they don't want to have a big bang and reintegrate all those systems to the right side of the MDM. For instance, you might have some customer-facing application that integrates with this mortgage document system of record, and you want to leave that undisturbed while you start to put this whole mastering and enriching process in place with MDM. And you can do this, and you can do this incrementally, and you can continue to add new systems of record to the MDM processes that you create. And I also listed on the slide what I think MarkLogic brings to this scenario, what its capabilities are that allow you to really achieve this. And the most important one, I think, is ACID. The fact that MarkLogic has this transactional capability, ACID transactions that allow you to confidently and consistently process data across the whole synchronization chain. And sorry, I'm just not getting my arrow going here. There we go. Oops, let's go back one. Yeah, synchronization. And then the second kind of choice that you're dealing with is, are you going to keep the original data structures and data forms that are in the source systems? Are they going to just migrate over to your MDM system, or are you going to do some remodeling of those tables and whatever resources you have in the source systems into business entities that are reformed, remodeled for new purposes and new consumption channels? So you have this choice of just sort of pulling the source information in there in its original form. For instance, here's an example where we have a customer and some order tables, and we're just going to bring them over from the source system and store them in the MDM system, and maybe do some, maybe keep track in the MDM system, maybe master customer IDs or something like that. But we're going to basically keep intact what the representation of those customers and orders are. And again, this is a situation. The use cases are where there's largely one kind of data that you're managing in the use case, and in this case, it's pretty much kind of this ERP data, and it's pretty much relational data, and you want to basically have a low impact way of pulling this stuff into MDM, mastering it, and also continuing to provide the backend services on the source systems. And MarkLogic lets you do this, with its flexible data model. We can ingest data in any source from any source system and pull it in, and we can store it in its native form and index it and provide some services over that data. So that's what our flexible data model lets you do. And then we also have we also provide in our MDM tooling, like Gary showed and I showed last week too, we're able to do harmonization in that tooling. So this is all going to be this is all capability that you're going to exploit if you make this choice of making entity models here that are referential. Okay. So the other way of thinking about entity modeling is you're actually going to remodel your data for new uses, and you're going to enable those new purposes, those new uses by, let's say, denormalizing your system of record data into new documents or new forms. You're going to be very maybe even more concerned with provenance and lineage, because you're going to be doing this denormalization and changing the form of your data, and you need to trace where that data has come from. Gary showed you the information timeline in the mastering demo that he just did that showed what happened as data moved through the mastering and merging process. And that same kind of timeline is available from the metadata that MarkLogic provides in its data processing pipelines, which we call flows, and which you saw in action. Whether it's MarkLogic flows or some other sort of orchestration, you still have the choice. You still have to make the choice as you're architecting MDM about, do you want to keep the initial data structures intact, or can you create new data structures? Is there a more useful way of consuming the data that you want to master in your MDM system? For instance, here, I took that customer and order information and I denormalized it into one sort of order document that includes, you can see up here, a bunch of these, some properties. It's a very truncated view here, obviously, but this, I put up for illustration, this last name property is a property from a customer address record, right? And, or from a customer record. And then the start date property is actually from a sort of sales item, order item line. So these kind of, this kind of denormalization and transformation, can provide new uses of data from the MDM system. And that's one of the benefits that people look to get out of MDM, these new data uses. So the third choice that I wanted to talk to you about is this choice of registry style MDM versus a kind of a data hub style. With a registry style, you're basically taking all of the metadata about your source, your systems of record, and pushing that into the MDM system and providing, and you can master that that reference data, but you're providing really a kind of a metadata view, read-only view of what's out there in your data landscape. And many people start this way. It's a quick way to get going. Its drawbacks and challenges are that it's sometimes difficult to query this kind of data because it's essentially this kind of contextless metadata. It's very hard to get meaningful results out of joining all this data together, you know, from an MDM client point of view. In other words, what you'd have to do is you'd have to do this joining. You'd have to sort of do your queries, understand the metadata format of all the your client system needs to know all of the data structures in the metadata, and then it needs to be smart enough to to join its query results together in a sort of a middle tier and create meaningful business results for the application or the service that is querying it. It's easy to get started with a system like this, and it can provide that sort of first level of business value that you need to get out of an MDM system. But it's hard to grow this, and it's hard to use this approach to provide a very broad level of service. And so that's why people, yeah, right. Okay, so this is a slide about relational stripping context from data. And I mentioned before that the sales order was made up of these tables. I'm not going to go too deeply into this unless I see in the chat that everybody really wants to go into this. But what this is, you know, relational systems will keep track only of the data that it knows that's kind of limited in shape to its physical model. So you have these tables, rows, columns, and there's not a real mechanism there to capture all of the relationships between that data. And so you wind up with having to deal down the road with a data model that looks like this. And the question is, you know, do you want to just sort of perpetuate that data model in the MDM system, or do you want to do some other kind of modeling with it? And the kind of modeling that most of our customers are choosing to do is taking place in these kind of hub style MDM systems. And the hub style system is very much what's enabled by the data hub framework we've been talking about, where you've got these data sources coming into the left, and you've got all the kind of MDM services that we've been talking about provided by the hub in the middle. And then you're consuming your APIs or consuming applications on the right side, bearing reaping the benefits of all that work done in the hub. And the reason why it's useful to have a hub-based system as opposed to the registry system I just mentioned is that you can deal much more easily with schema drift, with new data source, plugging new data sources in, because you're basically keeping all of the raw data in the hub and processing it as you need. The principle here also of economy is that this is a single holistic architecture a hub provides you with a much more holistic, architecturally simple kind of entity to deal with. So also in the hub systems, you have the capability to do your data models incrementally. So the source, if you have crucial business processes being driven off those systems of record, those processes can stay in place, and they can stay there as you model your data hub. And if you have a hub, as opposed to just a series of different tables that you have to join together, and you have models in your hub that provide denormalized views of crucial business objects that are important to the business, you then can start to audit the way all those things are put together, and you also have this kind of secure platform for sharing all of those new business objects you're creating. So the other aspect of having a data hub is, if it's a transactional data hub, it's now providing an operational bridge between the sort of observe the business side of your business and the run the business side of your business, where typically, you had this big bridge of components that join those two sides of your business, so that all of the stuff on the left side, which was the run the business side, was producing data, furious production of data in all different formats and to all different purposes. And then the right side of that scenario, which is the observe the business data, which is observe the business, which is very important for making timely decisions. Do I have to bring on more shipping personnel in my warehouse because I have these orders coming in, for instance? That piece of it becomes much more closely tied to the run the business side if you've got a hub like this that can make sense of all the different data that's being put out by the run the business side of things. So all this messaging, streaming, all this billing stuff and payments, all this can be managed in a real-time operational transactional way in an operational data hub. And MarkLogic, so really these are the that's good, because I'm done with this section and it's a good place to stop. So those were the architectural sort of patterns that I wanted to provide, and hopefully that sparks discussion and gives you some ways to think about putting your own MDM systems together. So I want to thank you, and see you in the rest of the talks.
Okay, if you can stop sharing, then what we'll do is we will hand over to Fred. Fred's going to talk about the way that we approach implementing with customers and proving out value. And then after that, we'll hand over to MuleSoft.
Thanks. So James, yes, we are going to talk about our proof of value approaches. So you have seen during these 3 events a lot of content about the MDM, but how do we start if you are interested from that? So what we do at MarkLogic is an approach called proof of value, and this helps you to answer to this kind of question, because as you know your business, you think you know your data, so you think it makes sense, of course, to integrate all this data to master and valorize your data silos, but you have to maybe find a budget for it. You have to deal with your line of business, and it's hard. If you're staying only theoretical, to quantify the value to integrate this data. to serve which kind of application with which kind of data. So maybe you have this kind of question, and it's often very complex to explain this kind of value to line of business if you want to grab some budget for it. They're not spending budget on MDM, they are spending budget to improve their applications. And of course, MDM is just an enabler for that. So you have to link all the dots. And maybe you don't know as well very well your data, because you know your application, you know where you are storing your customer data, your employee data, your parts data maybe, but not the data in itself. And on the other hand, you don't want to over specify as well your project, because it takes time, and you want to start fast, to start small, gradually, to improve your MVP step by step, but keep it agile, because things can change between the day 1 and day 30, for instance. So this is to answer all this question that MarkLogic is pushing what we call a POV approach, so for POV for proof of value. And this is really an exercise that we can do with you, with our customers, to prove the value, the real business value of integrating your data and consume this data in a sample business case, working on a very sample of your real data. And it's important in a time box approach, meaning that we know when we start, we know when we finish, and we change the scope according to these constraints. And of course, the idea is not doing that on our side, is to doing that with you, with your team, because at the end of the exercise, you don't get just a demonstration, just an illustration, but this is everything that you need to valorize your use cases. And this is also people organization. How do you organize yourself to find the right data, to connect the data to a data hub, and to master it, and to work with all your team, all your IT and business organization to make it a success. So this is ambitious, but this is what we do usually with many of our customers and prospects, actually. So we work together to integrate and curate again a sample of your data on a sample business case and value before, of course, if you like it, trigger a real project. So again, this is something that we run in a very strict schedule. So this is usually something that run between 4 to 6 weeks maximum. 6 weeks maximum. We don't want to go larger than that. But during this very strict schedule, we have a very flexible scope, meaning that we start with some features in mind, and it change. Like any project at scale, you change your mind, and it is totally fine. And this is the value of such an agile tools like the one that we can provide at MarkLogic. So it's very iterative, it's very collaborative. We are doing that with you. We meet you every time. And at the end, again, we are delivering 3 key assets. The first one is a live reusable illustration. So yes, it is a demonstration on your data. We demo that we can build something in such a time on the data you provide to us. But this is also feedback on how you can run this project with your team. And this is also, of course, a reference architecture in your context, as well as a project estimate. And to start it, we need basically to agree, of course, on the first scope. So that means anticipating the POV value and the description of it, and what you expect to get from a value from the POV and from MarkLogic, of course, in this POV. We need to agree on all the logistics and on the schedules. Again, this is a very tight exercise, so we need to be agreed on that before, align with the team, and have the data and the team available, of course, before we start. And again, you have some example here of some customer when we do it before going on a real project. So if I, just to illustrate it, if I take some example of the question that we ask you if you want to trigger a POV, we take this kind of schema that you have seen along the 3 events we run together on the MDM, but we need with you to define what are the data sources and to list them, what is a target data model, maybe very simple with some ontology and some link between business entities. What are the data curation you want to run and what are the data consuming application you want to serve? Answering to these 4 questions, you have a good starting point. And then we can go more in details and say, okay, well, the data. Okay, let's say that we want to identify 4 data sources, one for the physical person that you have coming from a mainframe. We need to know someone in your organization and know how to explain the data, what is inside this data. We need to have the size for the POV, let's say, I don't know, 2 gigabytes, and the size for the target project. And the same if we want to integrate as well some customer segments, if we want to integrate some, let's say, open data, to integrate some address reference data, like Vaudoise did if you was there in the first event, for instance. And maybe you want as well to integrate some email in your data, because if you are talking about customer data, the inbound or outbound email are very interesting stuff. So maybe you want to integrate MS Exchange as a data source with half of a gigabyte of data. But at the end, of course, in the project, the size. So this is the kind of discussion we have. Different data sources, a sample of the data for the POV, people that we can talk to understand the data, what is inside, or we can link the data together, of course, and run some deduplication scenarios. Then we discuss about the schedule. Again, we run it between 4 to 6 weeks usually. So we agreed on a start date, on an end date, on multiple workshops in between. So let's say a weekly workshop where we meet all the POV team and we say where we are, but also some very thematic workshop where we can speak with focused discussion on with line of business, for instance, with architects, with infrastructure guys. And so we can answer to all the questions, but again, in a very strict and very approved before schedule. And then at the end, again, you not only got this kind of demonstration, so that means that we can build a UI, consume the data, show you all the curation process we have seen before with Frank and Gary, but you have also how you can organize around this. How it was difficult to get the data, how it was difficult to discuss with this line of business to get the approval. And again, this is really a sample of a real project, and so you can get the value from it and have your budget to make it real in your organization. This is what we call a POV, proof of value, and we are very keen to start such a process with you, discussing with our team.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fred. Yeah, and I think this is really great for people that are on the call. If you are interested, then that there's a sort of framework that we work through to get you that proof of value as quickly as possible and help you make the business case to those above you. And we will hand over to Thomas from MuleSoft. Thomas, over to you to talk about your API-driven approach and MuleSoft.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. So yeah, I'm Thomas Höger. I'm with MuleSoft since last year, but I'm 20 years in IT, 10 years with Salesforce, and working now as a strategic architect in the customer success team at MuleSoft. And what I'm going to discuss today is the API-led approach and master data management. Well, if we speak from MuleSoft about whatever is concerning MuleSoft, we have this one slide discussing forward-looking statements, which just shall give you a reminder that there are some things to consider if you make purchasing decisions, and so I need to bring it here. There was a presentation 2 weeks ago from my colleague who already gave an intro about MuleSoft. Once again, to remind you that the purpose of MuleSoft is basically to help organizations to change and innovate faster and making it easy to connect the world's applications, data, and devices. And obviously, master data management is one important part in this game. It's a solution which powers applications, data, and even devices. And in that context, MuleSoft relies heavily on an architecture pattern we call API-led integration architecture. It has a couple of advantages in terms of decoupling to have system APIs, process APIs, and experience APIs. And that's what I'm going to deep dive a little bit more, how that would work with a master data management system on behind. This was a slide shown last time from my colleague, and I just want to put it as a reminder how MarkLogic can fit into that one, but this is a very high level thing. So let me go a little bit more into the details. And so first, to discuss about master data management patterns. Frank did a couple of interesting discussions about the very details of how master data management works and what are all the processes in behind. And there are some more, let's say, high-level patterns, which he also started to mention. And usually, if you look up master data management in the internet, you come across Gartner, and they refer to 4 styles usually. The first style they mention is the registry style. This is very much what Frank discussed with all the pros and cons. And then 3 styles: consolidation, centralized, and coexistence, which rely on a hub. And I want to show you how master data management system can well fit into that pattern of API-led architecture. To start the discussion, just want to introduce these 5 systems. So we have 2 applications, which you see on the top: a customer web portal and an internet service application. So the an internal service application. This is more an internal facing application where your agents may work. And this is more an application where your customers may connect using whatever mobile device or internet portal. And both applications need to access data stored in internal systems. I call them system A, B, and C in that purpose. And we have 2 entities. Not all of these systems have all entities, but you see system C and A, they have a second one entity here. So that's the base landscape, which I will use as a discussion. And without MDM, basically what happens, you have these 5 connections, which are more or less point-to-point connections. This may work in that beginning, but if you add some more applications, it's hard to scale and implies a lot of dependencies between applications. That's why we come up with the thing what we call API-led architecture. And in that API-led architecture approach, the key thing is that for every of these 2, let's say, outside applications, the internet, the customer web portal, and the internal service application, we provide experience APIs. These are kind of the entry points and dedicated for this application entry points where they can get all the data they need. The developers of that application do not need to know where they need to get the data from. They just issue API calls, get data, patch data, put data, whatever needed to that entry point. And yeah, so that's the thing we call experience APIs. Yeah, so to start with the first style, registry style, Frank already mentioned this is kind of the easiest style in the beginning because the key thing is you build up just a registry which knows where the data are. And one thing here is as well that this registry style solution may have some metadata about which of the sources is more trustful, has more priority, but this one does not store any data in itself. And how does that look up now in an API-led approach? How would it fit into? So first of all, here is a first overview about the API layers we do have. So the experience APIs I already mentioned. And for every system we have in that game, we have system APIs. So system A, B, and C have their own system APIs, as well as the MDM master. So MarkLogic, for instance, can well fit into that one. We have a MuleSoft connector. So MarkLogic built a connector for MuleSoft, which you can easily use there to integrate and build a system API on that level. What does it mean now for the integration flow? And a read example is usually the first one. You need to read some data. With a registry style, how would it work? So the application goes to its experience API. The experience API talks to the process API. And the process API itself does a couple of calls. So first one, it checks the MDM solution. Please tell me where I can find the data. And what rules do I need to apply? And then the process API would do call outs to each of the system APIs to retrieve the data. Finally, build up a response data structure, send it back to the experience API, and done. So you see, in that moment, the process API has kind of a responsibility to manage data. And that's what Frank mentioned. You need to build some of this functionality outside. Process APIs are a good place because they are the place which can be reused. And the similar would be if the other application would need to read data, it just goes to the same process API. So that's the first step here. Now, what happens if we need to write data? If we need to write data, the same thing. The application talks to the experience API. This one talks to the process API. No change so far. The process API now again turns to the MDM system API and tries to understand where it shall write the data to, and then needs to make sure to distribute the data here to all these three applications. And this can be kind of a complex thing because obviously you need to make sure that the data are actually written and that they are written in the way how needed. So usually you would probably build kind of a transaction here and make sure that the data are written to all of these systems. You see, it is possible, it's working, and there's a lot of considerations you need to put as thought into your process APIs to manage this one. In the end, this is basically the overall communication style. Applications experience layer, process API layer, going down to the system APIs. Ultimately, obviously, there are the processes in all these systems which still may change the data on the fly based on our operation signing here. No one would notice. Only upon read, it will be retrieved. Upon write, it will be done. That's the first one. Coming now to the next one style. This is the consolidation. Basically, what does consolidation mean? This is where the master data management provides a hub. This is a place where you have a golden record in your master data management system, and with all the processes around you have been listening to in the past presentations, all the things here. Still, in that approach, system A, B, and C would just have their original data. So they just copy them over and supply the master data management system with their data. In the API flow, if you think about these applications, the customer web portal and the internal service application requiring data, the high-level view on the APIs is very similar. We have the experience, process, and system APIs. Now, the communication looks a little bit different, and the complexity of the APIs look a little bit different. So for read, it's kind of simple. The experience APIs talk to the process API, nothing new. And the process APIs just need to query the master data management system, the hub, because it knows all. It has the data, it has the most valid data. This is a very easy, very simple flow and can provide the data needed. What about writing? So if you write data, there is one approach which I have drawn here, that again, the process API first talks to the MDM system and updates the data, and then the MDM system goes to the process API back and asks the process API to write the data to the relevant systems. That means the process API is the key communication part here in managing read and write operations between the external applications consuming the data and the systems here. Overall, we have a very similar communication flow, so the errors are very much the same ones, but the key here is the description, how the communication flows in between. We still have all these communications. So this was for the consolidation view. Going to the next one, style, which is a centralized style. Centralized means basically we have a hub which has the golden record in its own with all the things we discussed before. And we have in all the systems A, B, and C as well the full set of data. So they kind of mirror the golden record, and they somehow need to go there. This is kind of the most invasive thing, because you need to change the data models here. There are some occasions where it makes sense, so that's why it's a valid pattern to be discussed. In terms of the API approach, for reading, there is not a big change. And for writing, that I can discuss actually here in this flow very easily. It's still the same one as before, with the own difference that there is a need to really take care on the redistribution of the data back to the system A, B, and C. So you see the difference to the before to the consolidation is not that big, but the relevant thing is we need to synchronize every data back here, and probably the hub, the master data management system, is the driver of this type of synchronization. There is the last one pattern, which is called coexistence. And this is a combination. So that means we have systems which are which just use the MDM solution as a hub, and we have a system which needs to mirror the data, but does not have all the necessary APIs for real-time consolidation. In this moment, most of the things we discussed is valid as before. However, there is one new API which we may need to introduce here, which is a batch sync API, which takes the data from the master data management hub and puts it down to the system C for updating in there. So this is the big change here, which we would put into the process layer to have it. And with that one, having discussed the API-led approach and the patterns for master data management, the question is, what is the value of API-led here in this game? And that the conclusion is basically, if you need to add a new one system here, then it's very easy. You just add a new system API for that one system. You may need to do a slight change to the process API in order to access the system. And obviously, this is very important. In your master data management system, you need to build up all the logic for this new system. If it has a new entity, if there are new access ports, this needs to be built up. But the overall picture, what you see, it does not have any influence on your internal service application, on your customer web portal, because for them, it's completely agnostic. They just go through their experience APIs and get it from there. And as well, the other systems which are here in the game, they do not even realize that there is a change, that there is a system coming from. So here in that way, the API-led approach works very well in allowing you to scale, allowing you to add new data. And even if you think about adding a new application, which would require this data, you'll build just a new experience API. And with that, basically, I can finalize my presentation saying that was a slide you have seen before. I gave a little bit deeper look into the patterns, how they work with MuleSoft and the API-led approach. And obviously, MarkLogic is one of the great solutions we can include into that landscape for powering that application landscape. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. That was really helpful. And I think if anybody missed the first session on the first day, I'd advise you to go back and watch that as well, where we talked about some of the use cases and customers that are implementing MuleSoft and MarkLogic together. So I think that would be really interesting to follow up on. So just before we get to the Q&A session, I just want to thank all of our speakers so much for their time today. I think it's been a really interesting event. There's lots of great information that we've crammed in the last couple of hours. So thank you all for your time. And yeah, we'll move over to the Q&A session. Phil, do we have any questions that are unanswered? And then we can get to Shirish as well.
Yeah, no problem. We've got Miguel, who was asking when Gary was presenting, how much of these capabilities for MDMing/smart mastering rely or need language packages over the database?
So I'll field that. This is a great question. Mastering does not require the language packs in order to run. There is the language packs are going to give you things like stemming and tokenization capabilities, right? To compounded words like that, or compounded sentences and the individual words like that, which you'd find in German or in Chinese, right? However, the matching capability in MarkLogic doesn't rely on that. Now, with that said, there is, in terms of MarkLogic's own, for instance, our double metaphone capabilities, right? For being able to compare one to the other. Those are going to be biased towards Latin script languages, right? So if you've got Spanish or English or transliterated, Chinese and things like that, that is where that will be more effective. Now, we can leverage libraries that do mastering, or I should say matching rather, on foreign language character sets, provided that we can hook them in through JavaScript or something like that. But that's where I sort of draw the line. We can also do exact matching on the native language scripts themselves, which is to say that recall that mastering is not entirely based on the native language. It's certainly a big factor, right? And certainly helps. But you've got other kinds of data that's going to become important, like identification numbers and birth dates and perhaps some address information that might be available. They are part of that matching strategy, right? So bottom line is you don't need the language packs. If you are looking to do foreign language mastering in MarkLogic, we would love to talk to you more about that. And frankly, mastering is something that we are investing in. So if you are looking to do something in MarkLogic, for instance, on German, or if you're looking to do something in Chinese or Urdu or whatever it is, talk to us, because that might be something where we could perhaps take those kinds of requirements in and help to further enhance it. So language packs aren't required. We can master on and do exact matching and use, of course, the other attributes of data for identity matching. But in terms of being able to do more complicated foreign language matching for, for instance, misspelled names in a foreign language character set, we'd love to talk to you more about that particular use case so that we can understand those requirements better and figure out where to go.
Cheers, Gary. Thanks for that. And thank you, Miguel, for the question. We've got another couple of questions that have just come in, and then we'll go to Shirish. So we've got one from Mahan. Does MarkLogic support CDC to move changes from source systems to MDM and vice versa? Does this process API really need to handle it in all use cases? So I'm not sure who would be best placed to answer that. I don't know whether Mahan, you were directing it at a certain person that you wanted to ask. Perhaps it might be.
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of start to take a stab at it. I mean, what we our customers who have use cases that are dependent on CDC, for instance, let's say ERP cases where you're trying to put sales order items. I'll put some video into where you're trying to put sales order items together into a denormalized sales order object. So you're kind of waiting for updates to those items. You're waiting for updates to the order, and you're assembling that stuff as it comes into the hub according to some logic, some rules about how those pieces go together. So there are a couple of components to that. On the in the harmonization side of things, we can absolutely implement any of the business rules that you need to resolve that sort of change data coming in. On the orchestration, the input, the ingestion of all that CDC data, that's going to be a sort of dependent on your information, your system architecture. How are you going to push that stuff out? Like some people use Golden Gate, they just push a bunch of Golden Gate data out into MarkLogic, and we just sort of deal with that inside the hub by having the processes that understand what to do with Golden Gate data that's coming in. But it tends to be a particular business problem around what to do with that data. It's not what we offer is an environment where we give you all the flexibility to handle the business critical parts of CDC, and that's how we kind of provide that, implement that capability to you.
Cheers, thanks. Frank, thanks for that. Really interesting. We've got another one from Lane Tedder, who asks, do connectors support OT-related protocols for data ingestion and egress? He gives some examples of MQTT, OPC-DA, OPC-UA, Modbus over TCP, and other proprietary.
Well, so we've got connectors that use REST. So obviously, clearly not that in that case, but we've also got ODBC and JDBC connectors, and people write. We've got an API that people can write, can implement what they need to. But as far as I know, I do not know of any connectors on the market with those OT related protocols. So.
Okay. Cheers, Frank.
I see a couple more coming in. Phil, who do we want to jump to next?
We've had some questions regarding the documentation for that explains the integration pattern. This was directed at MuleSoft, and there's a couple of links in there that will be useful if anybody wants to follow up on that. I should mention that all of our recordings, we've had a number of requests for the recordings, can be found on our YouTube channel. Just go and search MarkLogic, go onto the channel, and the playlist that has all the recordings is Digital Acceleration, Powering MDM with MarkLogic. And that has all of the recordings and it will have this session as well. And what we do to make it a bit easier, we split out some of the sort of key sessions where we've had some speakers, and they're individual sort of 20 to 30 minute segments that you can pick up. Like James mentioned at the start, it's a really good idea to check out Epcon and Vaudois' presentation. Really good overview of MarkLogic there. I think Gary's is going to be very popular, as well as Frank's deeper dive into MarkLogic and MDM, especially the smart mastering feature with the merge and more importantly the unmerged feature, which I think a lot of people would enjoy. I think we're done for questions wise. Apologies, we've overrun. But there was a lot of content that we wanted to get in there. If you have anything you would like to know more about, if you've got any discussions that within your business around this and you think we can add value to those, then please do reach out. We're more than willing to help where we can, either with your existing MarkLogic implementation, or if you're a brand new customer to MarkLogic, then let's get you off the ground as soon as possible using Frederic's approach there for the proof of value.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone so much for your time. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you, Thomas and everybody. And we will see you at our next event. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.